For the second day in a row, I woke up struggling to gather my consciousness, trying to blink away the fog from a bit too much drinking. For a second, I thought maybe I was slipping into alcoholism, but I quickly shook off that thought. Yesterday was my birthday, and I damn well deserved it. A brief worry flashed through my mind about any unexpected consequences from my self-gifted celebration. I wondered if there was a doctor somewhere who could prescribe a morning-after solution. But as the haze cleared, I felt good. A light touch on my slightly swollen, intimate folds brought a smug little smile to my lips. Maybe I could give my toy a break, at least as long as there were other targets available. Then again, my wicked little gremlin whispered, maybe not. For the first time since arriving at the resort, I actually had a few hours that did not predicate the hunting for intimate opportunities. Kind of took a break, gave my libido a rest. Explored the resort away from the neighboring den of iniquity. The beach on the other side of the land spit was pristine, filled with tourists, young and old, all in a euphoric state. A sense of contentment washed over me. That satisfaction was cut short by the unsettling sensation of an unwelcome presence as a shadow loomed over me. It was last night's guy. I had no interest in seeing him again, ever. He had done his job, now he could get lost. Just as I was about to tell him to run back to his wife. I didn't have to. She showed up in full force. She got his attention with a sharp slap across the face, shoving him hard toward the resort. Her rage was mostly directed at me as she screamed, "Get your pathetic self away from that woman." My smile twisted into a quiet chuckle. Hands on her hips, eyes blazing, if looks could kill, I'd be 6 feet under, feeding the tulips. Could not help myself. I raised my hand using my thumb and forefinger, illustrating a gap purposely exaggeratedly short to imply her husband had inconsequential manhood. I shrugged and jerked my head in his direction. She flushed deep red, her expression shifting to mild confusion. Then, in an unexpected twist, she spoke, not with anger, but with a hint of humor. "Well, it might be small, but it is mine." I let out a quiet laugh. "Yeah, it's all yours. Don't worry." Somehow, with her husband out of the picture, yet perhaps because of a shared understanding about him, there was a sliver of connection, an unspoken agreement, a slight opening between us. Is it really that small? Should I tell her the truth or let her keep believing it? Because, honestly, from what I could tell, he was just shy of average, bigger than my husband, for sure, but much smaller than. I needed to stop thinking about him like that. "You know who?" "Well," was all I managed to say. "Yeah, maybe it is," she mused. "My friend's husband definitely fills out his swimsuit more than mine does." There was a wistful note in her voice, almost like a quiet longing. And then, unexpectedly, she extended her hand, introducing herself, Juliet. She started to say her husband's name. I quickly raised a hand to stop her. A knowing smile spread across her face. She understood immediately. "I know now that it won't happen again, at least not with my husband." I nodded. Her smile grew more assured. As if I was wearing a priest's robe, Juliet began telling me things I did not really need to hear. Juliet picked this place intending to possibly seduce her friend's husband. She had fantasized about him since they got married and had hoped her friend felt the same. Juliet stumbled a bit at the thought that her husband might have made a move on her friend. That might have given her an opening to validate her intentions. Her insecurities came through as she went on. She felt her friend's husband was not noticing her. Maybe she was not attractive enough. From my observation, Juliet had no reason to think that. She was thin, athletic, and even though she was not well endowed in the chest department, she had enough to fill her bikini top. Her face more than made up for it, pert nose, high cheekbones, and large brown eyes. She was very attractive. I do not think that there is a male on this island that would not find you attractive, and then I threw in, physically attractive. Her smile broadened. "How do you do it?" She caught the raising of my eyebrow. "I mean, last night, my husband," I laughed and then said, "It was my birthday, a lot of liquid courage, and, to be honest, I was extremely turned on." Juliet laughed. well then happy birthday, will take no offense, consider it was a present last night. I didn't, my fantasy was to take what I wanted, and I did. Juliet or no Juliet? She continued. Juliet was the reason they went next door last night. It was her curiosity, that just maybe she would be the recipient of an exciting dalliance. Not her husband, she was more jealous than hurt. I asked her if she would like to tour the facility next door. She was taken back, almost surprised, but noticeably interested. I explained that I had joined as a guest yesterday and was allowed to sponsor a visitor. Juliet nodded, then, isn't it a no-clothing zone? Yep, don't worry you'll fit in, I answered. She thought for a minute, then cast her eyes toward her husband, who still had a look of shock, as if expecting to be punished for his indiscretions last night. He was standing and talking to what I assumed was Juliet's friend and her friend's husband. Let me go tell them that we want to hash out the misunderstanding of last night in private. Then we can leave? Juliet went over and, with false angry animation towards her husband, but with a contemplative demeanor towards the others, apparently explained the reason she and I were going to have a personal one-on-one discussion. It must have worked. Juliet was back in a flash. Since my room was on the way to the hedonist gate, I figured it might be easier for Juliet to put on a robe. Youth has its advantages, and when Juliet slipped off her bikini, it was clear that her petite frame would be highly desired. Barely 5'2" and likely just over 100 pounds, her perky, modest B-cup curves showed no signs of gravity, unlike mine, which were engaged in a slow but inevitable struggle. Don't get me wrong, mine might have lost a half an inch or so and still do not slide of my chest when lying on my back. But, youth to be served, it is obvious Juliet's small oranges almost defeated gravity. I wish that I had a chest like yours, Juliet commented as she checked me out. Not always an asset, takes work to keep them from sliding down, but thank you. I always enjoyed a compliment. It was not lost on me that modesty was no longer my initial reaction. We wrapped the house robes around us and headed to the gate. Just inside the gate, a row of hooks awaited, perfect for hanging up our robes or whatever little clothing someone might still have on. I had no hesitation slipping mine off, but Juliet lingered for a moment. A quick, nervous scan of the crowd must have made her realize she'd stand out more if she kept it on. And just like that, off it went. A quick sweep of the area told me the resort was livelier than before, seemed like the weekend crowd had started rolling in. More guests, more energy, and in my mind, more options. I headed over to check in, introducing Juliet to Remy. While Juliet handled the paperwork, I took the chance to scan the scene, taking it all in. The male-to-female ratio had shifted, still more women, but not by much. Some were interesting, some not so much, but the ones that caught my eye most wore red bands, especially the younger ones. Naturally, they held my attention. Juliet finished up and slipped on a green band. My guess? She was on the pill and open to whatever came her way. Good for her. If she could push past her shyness and hesitation, she'd likely make her intentions a reality sooner rather than later. Now, don't get the wrong idea, intimacy wasn't the only purpose of this place. Sure, it was the main unspoken attraction, but on the surface, it was about being comfortable, social, and unrestricted. At least, that was the official stance. For me, though? It was a personal mission, a box waiting to be checked. Juliet, on the other hand, looked like a kid stepping into Disneyland for the first time, her head on a swivel, eyes darting around, trying to take in every detail. The wonder on her face was almost childlike, and for a moment, I found myself completely captivated by her expression. Then her head froze, eyes widening, lips forming a perfect O. I traced her gaze and landed on, without a doubt, the most jaw-dropping piece of man-meat I had ever seen, even in pictures. If that thing had fingers, it would have been an arm. It was that big. Even soft, its girth was thicker than my wrist, and it hung heavily, nearly reaching mid-thigh. I might have stared a second too long, but reality hit just as fast. That monster size was attached to a body that did absolutely nothing for me. Now, don't get me wrong. I have very vivid fantasies about interracial encounters, especially with a man built like that. But after dedicating so much of my life to staying fit, I just couldn't get past the soft, round physique and the enormous beer belly. No matter how tempting that particular asset was, the rest of the package was an immediate turnoff. Still, with a quick mental calculation, I figured he was packing at least 9 solid inches, as thick as a Coke can. Even if he dropped 50 pounds, there was another hurdle: he had to be at least a decade older than me, and my tastes leaned in the opposite direction. And, of course, he wore a red band. Juliet, on the other hand, was practically salivating. She jabbed me with her elbow like I hadn't just witnessed the same thing she had. Then, as if I had some insider connection, she asked how she could get introduced. I glanced back up at him. He was already watching us, his dark, round face splitting into a wide, toothy grin. I couldn't tell if it was aimed at both of us, just me, or solely at Juliet. Not that it mattered. Just beyond him, over his shoulder, I spotted Nadia deep in conversation with someone far more my type. Taking the lead, I grabbed Juliet by the elbow and strode straight toward the towering man. I introduced us both, then casually excused myself. For a split second, he looked disappointed, but his grin stretched even wider as he shifted all his attention to Juliet. Not that she noticed, her focus remained locked on one thing, and it wasn't his face. I made my way over to Nadia. The man she was speaking with was immaculate. Instinct told me he had to be more European than local, and at first glance, I knew he wasn't in Nadia's preferred age range. Actually, he was closer to my age, which meant I'd have to stretch my usual preferences a little. But with that lean, sculpted physique, over 6 feet of effortless elegance, and not a single visible hair on his body, I wasn't about to complain. His skin had a smooth, polished sheen, and everything about him was proportioned just right, including the impressive, but not excessive, length hanging between his legs. 4 or 5 inches now, but I'd bet at least 6 or 7 when fully ready. Nadia spotted me approaching. "Oh, there she is now," she said, turning toward me with a knowing smile. She gestured toward him. "I was just telling Adrian about you." His warm smile nearly disarmed me, and without thinking, I extended my hand, eager for the introduction. When he spoke, his soft Northern European accent sent a shiver up my spine. Any attempt at modesty was completely betrayed by the way my body responded. Adrian introduced himself and explained that he and his wife were from Denmark. They visited often and had what he described as an extremely open marriage, one that apparently extended to the entire family. My mind immediately went to places it probably shouldn't have. Cousins? Siblings? Maybe even more? Interesting. But then Nadia, ever the instigator, chimed in. Yes, Adrian and his wife brought their son-in-law, Gavin, with them this time. Ah. Now it made sense. Nadia had an angle, as always. If Adrian was around my age, that meant his son-in-law had to be somewhere in the 19 to 20 range, right on the outer edges of Nadia's usual preferences. Adrian's presence was completely mesmerizing, so much so that I barely registered when Nadia quietly slipped away. Within minutes, he and I were sharing a bottle of wine, exchanging glimpses into our lives, our desires, and the things we secretly longed for. There was no question in my mind, we were going to end up tangled together before long. I briefly glanced over to check on Juliet, who was only about 20 feet away. She was lost in her own world, both hands wrapped around that massive cock, her eyes shining with unfiltered hunger. There was no doubt about it, she was getting exactly what she wanted, her fantasy in the flesh. And her husband? The one with the unimpressive package? Clearly forgotten. The thought sent a rush through me, making my body hum with anticipation. I turned my full attention back to Adrian. I don't want to sound too forward, but actually, yes, I do, I murmured, my voice almost a purr. I want you. His lips curved into a knowing smile. I want you too, though I would have liked for you to meet my wife first. But she stepped into town for a few things. Then he reached for my hand. Come with me. His room turned out to be more of an open-air retreat, a veranda with 3 sides completely exposed to the ocean. A rush of modesty flickered through me for half a second, but it was quickly drowned out by the heat rising between us. Adrian's fingers brushed my shoulder as he guided me toward the large, inviting bed. Turning to face him, my hands traced a slow, deliberate path up his sides before one slid behind his head, drawing him in effortlessly. Our lips met with a tenderness that felt more like deep intimacy than the raw hunger of fleeting passion. Adrian's touch carried a restrained urgency, a sensual patience that sent a shiver through me, heightening every sensation and fueling my boldness. I lost all sense of time, caught in the rhythm of my own exhilaration. The intensity built up within me, surging like an unstoppable force. My body responded with a strength I hadn't known I possessed, elevating us both in a moment of pure release. Adrian collapsed beside me, equally drained. The gentle sound of waves lapping against the shore acted as a soothing lullaby, and before I knew it, sleep claimed me. I had no idea how long I was out, but my senses stirred as a gentle sensation washed over me. At first, I remained still, savoring the warmth and delicate touch. A hand, a breath, a presence, it was familiar yet slightly different. Without even opening my eyes, I instinctively reached out, resting my hand atop a head, guiding ever so slightly. A shift in movement beside me caught my attention. Then, a soft, unmistakable sound, a quiet gasp, a sigh of pleasure, came from just inches away. My eyes fluttered open, drawn to the source of the sound. Dark hair spilled over my shoulder, framing the face of someone lost in the moment. But then, my gaze traveled further, and confusion jolted me fully awake. Adrian was there, but to my shock, it wasn't him beside me who had stirred the unexpected scene, it was his so-called daughter's boyfriend, fully engaged with the woman next to me. My breath caught in my throat. A surge of unease swept over me as I tried to make sense of it. My head snapped downward, my hands still tangled in the unfamiliar strands beneath me. What the hell? I blurted out, my voice cutting through the haze just as another cry of release echoed beside me. For a fleeting moment, everything seemed suspended in time. Expressions locked in shock, eyes widened as understanding sank in. Gavin, my own son, stood there, set to become Adrian's future son-in-law. Adrian let out a low chuckle, the tension breaking just slightly. The woman beside him giggled, resting a hand on his shoulder. "Let me introduce you to my family," Adrian said smoothly. He nodded toward the woman. "This is Ember, my wife." Then, with a slight tilt of his head toward the figure between my legs, he added, "And that's our son-in-law, Gavin." A rush of thoughts crashed through my mind, none of them forming anything coherent. I'm Clara," I stammered, my grip loosening from the handful of hair I hadn't even realized I was holding. Gavin mumbled something under his breath, then without hesitation, turned his attention right back to what was in front of him. I was still reeling from all that had just happened, but the last part of having sex with my son without my knowing was what I was most ashamed of, though it was the best encounter I've heard in years. I never heard again from Juliet nor her husband. My activities for the day apparently overwhelmed me, the fatigue catching up. I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. The air inside felt suffocating, thick with the weight of what had just happened. My mind replayed every second like a broken record, but I couldn't allow myself to go there. Not now. Not ever. I forced my breathing to steady, staring out through the windshield at the dimly lit street. The world outside continued as if nothing had changed, as if my entire existence hadn't just been shattered. A couple walked past, laughing, their fingers intertwined. A jogger passed by, music blasting through his headphones, oblivious to the storm raging inside me. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat. I flinched, my pulse spiking. When I turned it over, the name on the screen sent a wave of nausea rolling through my stomach. I couldn't answer. Not yet. Instead, I let it ring until silence took over again. I should leave. I should drive home, take a shower, scrub everything off me until there was nothing left but raw skin. But my limbs felt heavy, cemented to the seat. The weight of what I had done, what had been done, made every movement feel impossible. The guilt came in waves, threatening to pull me under. I had convinced myself I was stronger, that I could stop before it was too late. But I had let myself fall into something I never should have touched. And now, there was no going back. I reached for the water bottle and the cup holder, my hands trembling as I twisted the cap. The cold liquid slid down my throat, but it did nothing to cleanse the bitterness in my mouth. How had I let it get this far? How had I allowed myself to cross a line I had sworn never to approach? My reflection in the rearview mirror was unrecognizable, eyes red and puffy, lips pressed into a thin line. I looked like someone else. Someone I despised. Another buzz from my phone. Another message. I didn't need to read it. I already knew what it would say. We need to talk. No, we didn't. Talking wouldn't change what happened. Talking wouldn't undo the damage. Talking would only make the wound deeper, leaving a scar I would carry forever. I turned the ignition, my car roaring to life. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay here. Every second in this place felt like suffocation, like I was trapped in a moment I could never escape. The confrontation with Amber and her husband had been brutal. The weight of the truth had shattered everything in its wake. Gavin had looked at me like a stranger, his trust crumbling before my eyes. Amber had been silent, her expression unreadable, but the devastation was there, buried beneath layers of restraint. And Adrian. The moment of truth had arrived when I stood across from him, knowing we would now have to redefine our relationship. Would he see me differently? Would he be able to look at me without seeing the wreckage behind my eyes? Introducing ourselves as future in-laws had been the strangest, most surreal experience. We all wore masks of normalcy, pretending that we were simply two families merging together, that no ghosts lurked in the spaces between us. But we knew. We all knew. I tried to tell myself that time would dull the edges of this night, that someday it would be nothing more than a painful memory buried beneath years of distance. But deep down, I knew better. Some choices brand themselves onto your soul. And this one would haunt me forever.
If my story resonated with you, don't forget to like and subscribe. Hit the notification bell to stay updated, and share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. See you in my next video.